do. Okay, you're on camera. All right, guys. So it's 7:16, and here we are. We're leaving on Monday, ready or not. And hope you're excited about it. I sure
Yes.
am. And just wanted to go over a few things, and then allow you to ask a few questions if you want, and then we'll hop into some teaching time that hopefully will prepare you for what you're actually going to experience when you're back on the East Coast. So the first thing is in one of my emails I mentioned something about Gettysburg and ticks, and needing some tick repellent. And I just want you to know that we are covered. Okay, we got plenty of tick repellents, so you don't need to get any. I'll have plenty for everybody. One thing I wanted to do. Also wanted to confirm the weather. Did I print it off or not? No, I didn't.
Sorry, George, are you sharing the screen, or I'm still seeing you, but there's a dialogue, on top of your face, saying the meeting is being recorded.
Well, I am recording. I don't see the same thing. Maybe try clicking out of it.
Oh, okay. That's sorry. The dialogue is on my screen. Okay. Sorry, but I'm still seeing you, George, not the.
Yeah, I'm not sharing at the moment.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see if I can actually find it. So let's see. Let's go back here. Weather. So right now, the weather when we get back to Richmond and Williamsburg, it's going to be 62, 67, and 74 during the day. So it'll start, it'll be sunny every day. It'll get down into the lower temps at nighttime. We'll be out until probably about 10 p.m. every night, 10:30. So it will start dropping down, but it probably won't get to those lowest temperatures until 2 or 3 in the morning. And no rain, and the winds are pretty mild. So our weather there in Virginia is going to be pretty good. We'll get to Washington, D.C., and wow, look at these temperatures. So we're talking 75 to 70, 75 degrees during the day, which will be a little warm, but very comfortable and partly cloudy. And the wind is decent. Anything below about 10 miles per hour is pretty decent. So these 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, are going to be pretty good. Saturday morning, however, it looks right now there's about a 40% chance of rain, and that's the morning that we'll be going to Arlington. So we will be outside walking around during that time. Of course, all of this weather can completely change, by the time we get there. So we'll just keep monitoring it. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. And when we get to Gettysburg, again, the weather's pretty decent. A little bit of chance of moisture, but not bad. So that's what's going on with the weather, at least as of today. Let's see here. So on Monday, are all three of you guys gonna ride up to the airport on the shuttle? Yes, no?
I might have my parents drop me off, but they're up in Sonoma County, so I can't really give anyone a ride unless they want to drive up there.
Oh, okay. So you're saying they might drop you off at the airport?
Yeah, but I'm gonna go over to the house probably. So that's in by Santa Rosa, so I can't give anyone a ride.
Oh, no, we don't need rides. You didn't see the email about
Okay.
that we were renting a van?
Oh, you guys. Oh, you are.
Yeah, we're renting
Oh, I missed that.
a shuttle.
Oh, I'll probably just take the shuttle then.
You got to read your emails, man.
I didn't see that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, got to read your emails. So Yeah, so there'll be a shuttle leaving from the church at 3, well, it's leaving at 4 a.m. and meeting at the the Liberty Center at 3:45. And so if you can get somebody to drop you off there, that's the best thing. But if you want to leave your car during the week at the church, you can. The email that I sent out said that you could park it back behind the buildings in the locked up area, but it turns out that that won't be possible. So if you do leave your car at the church, it's going to be out in the main parking lot, and we're gonna have you park them actually down in front of the church building, which is safer than parking them in front of the Liberty Center because of all the people coming and going from the apartments across the street. So anyway, so given that information, so Chris, do you think you'll take the church shuttle?
Yeah, I'll take the church shuttle. That's
Okay.
a lot easier.
Okay, how about you, Guiton?
Yes, the shuttle.
And how about you, Kurt?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then I'll check with the other guys. Okay. So just a reminder, you can check in for your flight up to usually 24 hours before the flight. So you can check in on Sunday, and there may not be that great of an advantage. It would only be if they happen to overbook the flight for some reason. You're more likely to be guaranteed a seat on the plane and not get bumped. But anyway, you just you don't have to wait to get to the airport to check in. You can do it online. Flying on the plane, are you guys pretty familiar with flying on planes and stuff, or is that kind of new for you?
Yeah, pretty familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
What, Chris?
I'm familiar. I mean, I've been on a plane a couple times.
Oh, a couple times. Okay.
Yeah, we just try to bring our baggage on. I'm just gonna bring one bag and try to keep it with me. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're gonna try and really be compact then.
Yeah, I think I'll make it just one duffel bag.
You're a minimalist, huh? Okay.
One thing is that I guess I don't have to check in my baggage, but I have to double check the dimension, the size requirement for carry-on baggage.
Right.
I don't know, I forgot the airline, but I have to check the website.
Yeah. Yeah, it's American going out.
Mm-hmm.
And Alaska coming back. Just a reminder that you'll probably want to take some food on the plane with you, because I don't think it's not likely that we're going to have time to eat lunch in Charlotte on our layover. So it'd be a good idea for you to have some snacks or even a sandwich or something, in your carry-on. And of course, you can't take water through security, but once you get in, you can fill up a water bottle. So
Right.
just kind of be thinking about that, taking it on the plane. And also being prepared for, if you want to watch movies or anything like that, what the airlines are doing these days is, rather than showing movies on a computer screen on the back of your seat, they kind of have onboard internet going on, and they can stream movies to your device. But you have to have a cell phone or a tablet or a computer or something, with Wi-Fi hookup, and then you have to download their particular app in order to connect to it. And of course, you have to wear earbuds or a headset to listen to it. So if you want to watch a movie going or coming back, you just want to kind of be prepared for that. If you don't care, bring a book.
I might just sleep.
Yeah, I know I will. Something that a lot of people don't think of but it's kind of helpful when you're traveling in groups like this. It's not as bad when you only have two guys in a room, but sometimes when you get 3 or 4 people in a room, it can be really critical. And that's that, you know, we usually have a plug-in for our cell phone, a plug-in for our, you know, for our Bluetooth speaker, a plug-in for our Razer, you know, all these different plug-ins. And the hotels, when they were made, weren't made with, you know, multiple electrical sockets. So when I go on my trips, I always take a little power strip, you know, not a big honking one, but this, you know, a small power strip that has maybe four connections in it. And, you know, and if you've got, you know, a couple people in a room and, you know, you're trying to plug everything in, it can get a little crazy. So you might consider that. Just a little tip. Yeah, make sure you bring your phone charger. And then make sure you budget, you know, for, you know, bring some money for meals. The dinners are going to be, we're going to kind of play the dinners by ear. I can pay for everybody's dinner on the church credit card and then just put it on your account and then you pay back later. Or if you prefer to pay it yourself, you know, on the spot, you can do that too. You know, it's pretty flexible. But at the very least, the lunches, you know, that'll be out of pocket. So you want to make sure and, you know, budget some money for that and for souvenirs. Okay. And I think those were the only things I was going to touch on. What kind of questions do you guys have?
How much money would you recommend bringing?
Well, you know, it used to be, I would say like, you know, about $200, but now it's hard to get away with a dinner, you know. Well, you know, usually dinners are costing about $30 these days, you know, between your food and your drink and your tip and tax and everything. Lunches are costing, you know, 15 to 20. So, you know, I would, you know, and then of course your souvenirs. So I would say, to be safe, probably 300.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe 300. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to spend all that, but the better to have it. Well, you know, you got your credit card, so you know most of those expenses are going to be on your credit card anyway. So it's not like you have to bring 300 in cash.
Yeah.
But it is a good idea to have a little bit of cash, especially like $1 bills and such. You know, if you want to tip anybody, you know, it's just kind of handy to have that.
Okay.
What else? Nothing? Okay. Well, if you
Sorry,
think,
I was muted. Sorry. I was asking, you could pay the tip with the credit card as well, right? Not
sure,
just necessarily cash.
sure. Yeah, I'm talking more like a shuttle driver, or
Oh, I see.
you know, a guy at the door of the hotel. That type. I'm not talking about tips for meals.
I see. Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you get any questions, don't hesitate to ask. So about 6:30, I sent out an email which had some documents on it. You're welcome to either print those off or type right on them on your computer or not do anything with them at all. You know, you're not in school. I'm not going to give you a grade, so you're not required to take notes. That's just a tool for you if you want to use it, and that's a learning style for you. But there's no pressure whatsoever. And what we're going to do tonight. Well, let me give you kind of a little example. When right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm wearing this pair of glasses. These are my computer glasses. If you see me at church, I'm wearing these glasses. And these glasses are for long distance, like for driving and such. And then I've got bifocals, and that's for my, up close reading. And if you ask me to look at, right now using these glasses, you guys are fuzzy. I can't see you well. If I try and read or drive with these guys, you're going to be fuzzy. So, but if I only owned one pair of glasses, I would use them for everything. And everything that I see through those glasses, that would be my reality. You understand what I mean by that? I wouldn't know any different. I wouldn't know that you guys don't have fuzzy faces. I would assume that everybody has a fuzzy face. That is reality, because that's with the glasses that I'm looking through, that's what I see. And my mind tells me that's the way things are. But if somebody hands me another pair of glasses, I put them on and I go, oh, people's faces aren't fuzzy. I begin to see the world from a new perspective. And that's kind of what this teaching tonight is about. It's kind of putting on a new pair of glasses and preparing you for what you're going to experience. But tonight we're not going to be talking about any particular sight that we're going to see. We do all that on site when we get there. This is about giving you a pair of glasses so that when you go out and see those sights, you will see them correctly. Does that kind of make sense? Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay. And I appreciate it, any kind of verbal feedback you can give me. That way I know that you're still with me, all right? And you're still engaged. So that's kind of what this is about. And hopefully it won't be too boring. Actually, hopefully it'll be, it'll kind of stimulate your thinking, and it'll kind of excite you a little bit because you're going to begin to see things a lot differently than probably you've ever seen them before. I had an opportunity. This was back in 1999. I was on staff at Home Church as the children's pastor, and I had a vision or a passion ever since I was in high school to be a tour group leader and to lead student tours. And that's because when I was in high school, I went on student tours. And so I tried to lead a couple Israel tours, and it didn't work out because, war broke out. As we know, it does often over there, as we're going through it right now. And so those tours never happened. And so I kind of felt like, okay, well, I think what I'll do is maybe I'll organize a tour to the East Coast. And see Washington, D.C. and take some people, and that'll kind of get me used to doing this whole thing, and that'll be kind of a trial run for going to Israel someday. So I connected with a tour company called American Christian Tours and arranged a tour. And they said, well, how would you like to have a guest lecturer go on your trip? I was like, well, sure, I guess. It's only going to cost maybe $100 more per person to do that. So we got a guest lecturer on our trip. It was a guy named Dr. Marshall Foster. And he was the head of what at the time was called the Mayflower Institute. And then it became known as the World History Institute, I think it was. In any case, he was on the tour. And he shared some of what I'm going to share with you tonight. And it rocked my world. Absolutely rocked my world. Because see, when I was in high school, I wasn't interested in history at all. I got C's, C minuses. I was barely passing my history classes. It just wasn't relevant to me. And my history teacher was teaching, making me memorize names and dates and, and all these types of things. And it's like, whatever, but it means nothing to me. And so history just wasn't my thing, but I went on this tour with Marshall Foster and that rocked my world. And it was like, oh my goodness, why didn't they teach this stuff to me in high school? Why didn't they teach this stuff? It would have transformed my, not only would have got me passionate about history, it would have changed my whole perspective on life. Well, they couldn't have taught it because they didn't know it. If you don't know the Lord Jesus Christ and you don't have a biblical worldview, then you're not going to be able to teach it. Now, of course, I had secular teachers. So anyway, I'm hoping that your world is going to get rocked too. And if it doesn't, at least you'll have a fun tour with a bunch of guys. So what we're going to do first is the first excursion we're going to take is in the area of an area called What is History? And if you have the notes printed out, that's one of the documents that you have. It's going to be called What is History Student Outline. And to begin, I'm going to show you a little video clip here.
Johnny wakes up at the bottom to Joe DiMaggio. John McCarthy, Richard Nixon's food, and they could tell her that you know the South Korea Maryland Monroe. John ran with the king and I and the surrender right. Eisenhower back to the England's communist bloc. Roy Tong, what from Tuscan GD back on, getting phone calls right around the clock. Einstein, James Dean, but turns out away the team, they need a man.
All right. So let's get in here. Okay, can you guys all see that?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, good. So what is history? What is history? If I were to ask you that question, what would you say? Just quick answers.
What you just said?
You remember what I just showed you on the video?
Yeah.
Yeah, cheater. Okay, yeah,
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I shouldn't have shown the video. Anyway, so
History, history is some study and documentation of the past of human, something like that. Can I say that?
yeah. Okay. All right. So I can tell you guys I'm gonna have to go fishing for you guys to draw you out.
When I think of history, I think of something that happened when I wasn't alive.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. We think of history as being something in the past, right? And usually before we were alive. It's those things that have cobwebs on them that we read about in books, right? But the fact is that you guys are making history every day. You ever thought about that? You are characters in history. I mean, you're characters, there's no doubt about that. But you're characters in history. And you're making history. Now, it may never get documented in a book, but still, the decisions that you make, the path that you take, the people that you influence are going to have an impact that ripple throughout time. You are making history. Webster's Modern Dictionary, the 1993 version, says history is what we would expect: past events, especially those involving human affairs. There's another dictionary that I'd like to refer to, and it's by a guy named Noah Webster. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Noah Webster before. Noah Webster was one of our founding fathers. I can't remember. He either was a signer of the Declaration or the Constitution. I can't remember which one. But he is actually known as the founding father of American scholarship and education. He's called America's Schoolmaster. And one of the books that he wrote was this book. You probably can't see it. It's called the Blueback Speller. The Blueback Speller. And this was the textbook that was used in the one-room schoolhouses in our country for over 100 years to teach spelling, to teach grammar, to teach history. Just this one little book. It's thin little. I'm having trouble getting. Yeah, this one thin little book is so complete that it educated our young people. And what's interesting is the literacy rate in colonial America was much higher than the literacy rate today. As a matter of fact, at the time of the Revolution, it's estimated that 96% of the American population were literate. 96%, which is much better than today, even in our own valley. So Noah Webster's, another thing that he wrote was this big book. It's called the American Dictionary of the English Language, the 1828 version. And what's really wonderful about this is Noah Webster was a Christian man. And when he gave all the definitions, with almost every definition, he gives some sort of spiritual application and often gives a Bible verse to go along with it. So it's a dictionary that was meant for the general public, but it was written by a Christian who saw that everything in life had a spiritual biblical application. And frankly, that's the way our founding fathers were. That's the way people who lived during, up until, I would say, up until the late 1800s, early 1900s, our country was filled with people who had what was called a comprehensive biblical worldview. They saw everything in life through the lens of the Bible and biblical principles, and they applied biblical principles to every area of life. So Webster's 1828 dictionary has a definition for history, and it says that it's an account of facts, particularly respecting nations or states, an account of the origin, life, and actions of an individual person. So it's an account of nations and states. It's an account of individual people, an account of things that exist. It's a narration of events. And I want you to remember that word narration, a narration of events in the order in which they happened with their causes and effects. And narration, the dictionary says, is a verbal relation of facts or events. It's a story. So when we call it, when we speak of, like we're watching a movie and we say there's a narrator, well, the narrator is a person who's telling the story to us. So a narration is a story. And history is more than just individual facts, bits and pieces that we have to memorize and have and don't mean anything to us. It's actually a narration. And there's two different, Webster's talks about two different things. It talks about the narration, and it talks about something called an annal, A-N-N-A-L. And there's a difference between the two. An annal is what we normally think of being as history. An annal relates simply the facts and events of each year in strict chronological order without any observations of the analyst. So that's the way we kind of look at history is, well, you know, these facts and dates and everything in a row and just have to memorize it all. But that's not really history, at least not according to Webster. That's what's called an annal. History, according to Webster, regards less strictly the arrangement of events under each year and admits the observations of the writer. So history is much more than just these dates and facts and figures and people and, you know, order of events and memorizing. It's a story. As a matter of fact, it's a big story. So I want to talk a little bit about what I call the universe that is man. Generally speaking, all humans, even us as Christians, all humans are egocentric. We look at life with ourselves in the center. How do life experiences affect or involve me? And if we don't see a personal benefit or effect, then we generally don't pay much attention to things. In the Truth Project, I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, it was a great series by Focus on the Family a number of years ago. It's a worldview series. In there, they taught about this concept, and they called it egocentric myopia. Egocentric being self-centered, and myopia being nearsightedness. So egocentric myopia is self-centered nearsightedness, where all we see, all we allow ourselves to see and even bother to be concerned with are things that personally affect me. And we become the center of the universe. Life is about me. And we don't see life from the bigger picture. But we need to start thinking of our lives in historical terms, from God's perspective. A humanistic view of history, this is a humanistic view of history. And a humanistic view of history is man-centered. And it says that history is a retelling of what man has accomplished or destroyed. And, Guitong, when you gave, your definition of history, you kind of alluded to that. It's, it's a telling of the things that man has done or man has accomplished. But that's actually a humanistic view of history, where it's man-centered. Also, a humanistic view of history is based on what's called naturalism. And naturalism basically says that all that exists in reality is what can be experienced with the five senses. And so it basically says there is no supernatural world, there is no spiritual world, there are no spiritual beings, there is no God, there are no angels. When we die, we just die, we turn into dust, and there is no afterlife. And so all that exists can be, is what can be experienced with the five senses. Humanistic view of history also sees history as random events. Just a series of random events that kind of happen to happen that may or may not have any connection with each other or any meaning or any kind of purpose. And because everything's random, then that means that it demands an uncertain future. A destiny that's dictated by the whims of man, the control and power of leaders and organizations, and random acts of nature, your earthquakes and tornadoes and things like that. But really the future is uncertain because everything's random. But there's another view of history, and this is the view of history that I really want to focus in on tonight, and that I hope that you can capture and get your head and heart wrapped around. And as we go to, back east, it's really going to help you to be able to appreciate what you see and hear and experience so much more. The providential view of history says that history is really his story. History is not a story about man and his accomplishments. History is about God's story and God's accomplishments through mankind. It is a story of men, But it's a story of men in the sense that men are placed continually in positions of having to choose to obey God or not obey God. And when they obey God, they experience blessings. And when they don't obey God, they experience cursings. But ultimately, it's a story about God. And it's a story that God put in place from the beginning of time, actually before the beginning of time. From eternity past, he knew that he was going to create something called space and time, and that he was going to place human beings, creations that were made in his image, imago Dei, or made in his image. He was going to place them into this space and time, and he was going to have a relationship with them. And he knew ahead of time that they would fall and they would rebel against him. But he knew ahead of time that he would step into that world as part of his plan and redeem these humans back into relationship so that they could live forever with him. But it was all planned out from the beginning. And God intended to be intimately involved in every detail of his plan. That's a providential view of history. In Psalm 33, verse 10 through 11, it says, "The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations." So he thwarts the purposes of the people. Even though, mankind that don't know him, they shake their fist at God and say, I'm going to be my own God. I'm going to have my way. God, ultimately, his plans will stand firm, as the scripture says. The purposes of his heart will stand firm throughout all generations. In Isaiah 46, 9 through 11, it says, "Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. And I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. From the east I summon a bird of prey, from a far-off land a man to fulfill my purpose. What I have said, that I will bring about. What I have planned, that I will do." I don't know about you, but when I get my head wrapped around that God's purposes will come about. And regardless of what choice, bad choices I make, he's already made provision for that. And ultimately, even if I screw up, he is still going to accomplish his purposes. And that the future isn't unknown and uncertain, but it will be fulfilled exactly the way he intends. That brings a tremendous amount of comfort to me. And I hope it does to you too. This providential view of history involves what's called a meta-narrative. Meta means large, narrative means story. So it's a large story, a meta-narrative. And really, a meta-narrative is any large story that gives an explanation of anything, but especially an overarching story of history and life that attempts to explain and validate truth. And God has a meta-narrative, a large story, a big story that he has already set out from before the beginning of time. So I'm going to take a few minutes here and kind of take us through a comparison of worldviews between a humanist view of the world and a providential view of the world. So you can kind of compare and contrast and see what the difference is. A humanist would say that there is no meta-narrative, no big story to explain things and to give context for life. Life is random and everybody tells their own story. Whereas the providential view says that God has a meta-narrative, a big story, and it's his eternal plan for space and time. And it's laid out in detail before creation to accomplish his purposes for mankind, both individually and as a group. The humanist would say there is no God. Man is his own God, and thus there are many demigods. But the providential view says there is a God, and he is one. He's triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but he is one God, and he can be known. We can have relationship with him. The humanist says what we see is all that exists, all that has ever been or all that ever will be, and that's naturalism. There is no supernatural or spiritual realm. But the providential view of history says that space and time, which we call history, but space and time are creations of God in this natural visible world that he also created. Space and time that are sandwiched between eternity. So we have eternity past, and then this thing called history or space and time, and then eternity future. And God has also created supernatural beings that exist outside of space and time, the angels, and all the heavenly beings that interact with us and influence God's visible creation. The humanist view says there is no external intervention from any kind of God or force or anything upon life, upon what they consider to be reality, from outside the box. So to say that in a different way, a humanist sees reality as being kind of like in a box, and everything that exists is inside that box. And there's nothing from the outside that even exists, let alone anything from the outside that influences what takes place inside that box. But the providential view says, oh, no. God has created this natural world, the box. But there's also a supernatural world outside the box. And he intervenes. He's sovereign and he's in control. And he's actively working within the box, within space and time, to accomplish his purposes. The humanist says there's no objective or universal truth system that's true for all people at all times and in all places. Everything's relative. Your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. If they happen to totally contradict, well, that's okay. We just accept each other, accept that each of us have a truth. And if you try and impose your truth upon my truth, then you're being intolerant. And it's crazy. But that's where humanism comes from. The providential view says no, there are objective truths that are true for all people at all times and in all places. And that standard of truth is God's very character and nature, which are expressed through his laws and through his moral principles. The humanist says there is no meaning to life, and there's no anticipation of anything beyond this life. So there's really no meaning to life except to try and be as happy as possible and eat, drink, and marry, for tomorrow we will die, as the scriptures say. But the providential view says that because God has plans and purposes which he is orchestrating, life takes on a tremendous meaning and has consequences not only in this world, but also for the eternal life, for eternal hereafter. The humanist says that the goal of life is self-actualization. What's called self-actualization. It's of the individual. It's becoming all that you can be. You even hear that in commercials lots of times. Be all that you can be. And we are to be all that God has called us to be. But those are two different things. But the humanist believes that the goal of life is the self-actualization of the individual and the attainment of power or control or money. I want more education. Well, why do you want more education? So I can have a better job. Well, why do you want a better job? So that I can have more power, more control, more money. If the reward is obtained, if a person actually reaches their goal, it's obtained only for this life. And then when you die, as I've heard it said, it's like playing a Monopoly game. and you're working so hard to win the game, and you're buying hotels and motels, and getting properties, and and all these types of things, and you're trying to earn as much money as you can. But at some point the game ends and you put all the pieces and all the money and all the properties back in the box. You don't get to keep it. But if you have a providential view, you understand that man's chief end isn't to be self-actualized. His chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And that the ultimate desire is to serve God and our fellow men in the hope of seeing God's kingdom established on the earth. The humanist believes that the individual has no value beyond what they can contribute to society, and only as long as they are contributing. That's the reason we have things like euthanasia and such. As people get older, assisted suicide. Well, they're not, they're no longer benefiting society. They're no longer useful tools in the machine of the society. And so they're just a drag on the society now. They're not useful anymore. So we need to find ways to get rid of them, get them out of the way. This is a form of what's called utilitarianism. Utilitarianism says that what ultimately matters is that people have good lives, this quality of life thing. And if you don't have quality of life, then your life isn't worth living. And it also says that what ultimately matters is that people contribute towards the common good. So if they aren't contributing towards the common good, then their life doesn't matter. The providential view says that God has created all things for his pleasure and glory, including the weak, including those with handicaps of various kinds. Mankind is his special creation, made in his image, to have relationship with him within space and time, but also into eternity. And each person has inestimable, inherent value, regardless of their contribution to society or quality of life. And history, the study of history, is taught as random people, dates, and places that have no connection or meaning. But the providential view says that history is taught as a revelation of God and of his preordained plan that is logical and it has meaning. It is also a testimony of the victories and failures of mankind as it seeks to obey or disobey God's plan. Let's see. Oh, and they also believe that the study of history, humanists believe that the study of history has little value since it is more likely to hold back perceived progress. And this is based on evolution. In evolution, the idea is that mankind evolves and becomes higher and higher levels of beings. At some point, maybe reaching some sort of state of perfection. Of course, we know that that's BS. And but if you believe that, then the study of history in the past is only an anchor that you're carrying around, because it doesn't really matter what's happened in the past. All that matters is what's going to happen in the future, how we're going to evolve. That's what the humanists would believe. Unless, of course, history can be rewritten in order to manipulate the masses towards achieving the goals of those who are in power. But from the providential view, with history, because God's character and nature and man's sinful nature do not change, so God doesn't change, man doesn't change, history tends to repeat itself. And the wise man will closely observe the meta-narrative, the big picture, the big story of history, what's happened in the past, will understand what God's will is, and will seek the ancient paths that will lead to blessing and avoid destruction. So the bottom line of this is the humanists won't learn from history because they don't value it. But the person with the providential view understands that learning history is critical. It's absolutely critical to know history so that we can be blessed as those before us have been blessed, and we can avoid the cursings of those who before us have been cursed. So I'm gonna just take a moment here and breathe. And you guys have been listening to me rattle on for a while, and I know that can be tiring as well. I get that. It can be kind of like white noise after a while. So any questions or comments on anything that I've shared so far? You're muted. No comments, no questions.
So I forgot the different histories.
That's all right. The
So like, so you're saying like the history we learn in like school and stuff, that's like the human, the one on the left?
yeah, the humanists.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Seems like that.
And that's a lot of the history that's taught in TV, History Channel and various things like that, because they're
Sort of
go ahead.
sort of taking over this age, that kind of history.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
And people don't, especially in our valley, people are, people tend to bend over backwards getting trying to get their kids like into charter schools that focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Uh-huh.
In our valley is so much into the whole tech area, tech and math, and science.
Yeah.
But you talk to them about history, it's almost like that's an elective for them. It's like not even on their radar as being important. But they don't realize that they're being very foolish, because it's history. It's history that gives us the foundation and the context to be able to learn the math, learn the science, learn the technology, and be able to apply it in ways that are going to bless mankind.
Right.
Yeah. And it's also going to bless the individual learning it, so that they don't come to the end of their life and say, okay, well, I spent my entire life, applying all my technology and everything, but what did it get me? How is my life better by it? What was the point? Whereas if you have a providential view of history, everything in life has a point. Everything in life has a meaning. You can't walk out your front door if you have that worldview. You can't walk out your front door without saying, God appointed this day in history for me to be a part of. He caused me to be born in this place at this time, and to live in this place in this time on this day for a special purpose. God, what do you want me to do today to participate in this piece of your eternal plan? Even if it's going to the grocery, talking to somebody in line, it just totally changes our perspective of life.
Yeah.
So sorry, I meant to be asking questions, not to be, preaching, but
that was nice. That was good. I liked it.
You're a good man. You guys are really good putting up with me. Hopefully you're getting some out of this. Any other questions or comments before we move on?
So George, you said early on that for humanist view, that's what you call, right?
Humanist, yeah.
Humanist view, thank you.
Okay,
there's no, I forgot the words you put there, but you said there's no objective, whatever the
objective
truth system. Yeah.
Right. Mhm.
What do you mean by that? Can you give example? Like I guess the many historians, they try to, you know, approach the truth, right? What really happened in the history. And there are some events in the history that many people agree upon, right? That really happened. Like Second World War, you know, started 1939, September 1st, right? I don't think there's any people who would disagree with that. So yeah, can you just clarify that comment, that
Sure.
note?
I was dealing more in the area rather than talking about historical events. It was talking more about, although I would even are beg to differ with you even on that particular point. But the the point of what that was trying to make was not so much truth regarding historical events as much of it was truth regarding morality, right, what's right and wrong.
Okay, I see.
So in our day and age, our children have very much been taught within an education system that teaches situational ethics, what's called situational ethics. In other words, if you ask them, is it wrong to steal? Well, if you come from a biblical worldview, you would say, yes, thou shalt not steal. That is a truth. Now, but in situational ethics, in our culture of moral relativism, a kid might say, well, it kind of depends. You know, are you stealing for yourself? Are you stealing for a friend? What was the situation in which a person was stealing? Maybe they were justified in stealing. And so everything is very loosey-goosey, and morals aren't steadfast for all people at all times in all places. They're situational and change from person to person and from situation to situation. So that's what that was saying. And if you have a humanistic point of view, you don't believe that there's a God. And if you don't believe that there's a God, then you also don't believe that morals and values come from a God. Well, then where do the morals and values come from? Well, they either come from the society that you live in, the society mutually agrees on what those morals are, or you decide for yourself what your morals are going to be. But if you're a humanist, you have no accountability to anybody outside of yourself or outside of your community. You don't have accountability to a God that's saying this is right and this is wrong. I don't know if I'm making it.
Yep.
Are you staying with me on that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Just moving on here. History is like a tapestry. I don't know if you've ever seen a tapestry. One of the places that I take school groups to in Washington, D.C. is called Washington National Cathedral. And it sits up on a hill above Washington, D.C. It's this big Gothic cathedral. It was made in the early 1900s. Well, actually, wasn't finished till 1984, I think. But it's in the style of a Gothic style. So it has the flying buttresses, those wing type things coming off the sides in order to hold the sides up, the sides of the church up. So it's really beautiful. It's pretty. It's very liberal. They've had Islam, leaders come in and speak, and it's just kind of crazy. It's not very Christian at all. But all that to say, within the National Cathedral, they have these beautiful tapestries hanging on the wall, and many of them are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they're beautiful as you look at them. They're basically paintings made with thread on material. But if you had an opportunity to look behind those tapestries to see what the backside looks like, what you see on your screen is what it would look like. That's what a tapestry looks like from the backside. It's a mess of strings. you can't see any picture of it. You can't make sense of it at all. And yet on the other side, this is what a tapestry would look like. And history is kind of like that. From our point of view of history, what we see is a lot of broken ends and, all these things taking place in life that seem so random. And, we almost feel like, victimized, like we're victims of things that come up. We're victims of a war in Israel starting, and we're victims of a earthquake happening, and victims of shootings down the street, and we're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's because we're seeing history from that backside of the tapestry. But if we could get around the other side of the tapestry and see history from God's perspective and have this providential worldview, all of a sudden, all these random things in life begin to make sense, and there are connections that begin to form, and you begin to see patterns, and you all of a sudden see life as being much more beautiful and much more orderly, and you see God's intervention, him being very intimately involved in every detail of life in a whole new way. History also repeats itself. There's a gentleman named George Santayana. He was a philosopher. He lived from 1863 to 1952. And he's famous for a number of quotes, but one of the quotes he's famous for is, and there are variations of this quote, but this is one of them: "Those who will not learn from the past or from history are doomed to repeat it." Those who refuse to learn from the past are doomed to repeat history, because history repeats itself. This particular cartoon here shows one of these big heads on Easter Island, and these big statue heads on Easter Island. Nobody knows for sure where they came from. They don't know what culture made them or anything like that. And they're buried, in the earth. If you dig down in the earth, there's more to the statue. I don't think the whole statue is there, but there's more to the statue below ground. But there are all these statues. There's like over 100 of them on Easter Island. Huge, 30, 40, 50 feet tall. And we could look at those and go, gee, what a sad story that, here's this culture that doesn't exist anymore, and that the only thing that's left of them are these broken, partial statues. And yet, if you've ever seen the movie Planet of the Apes, I don't know if you have or not. Maybe that was more in my time frame when I was a kid, a teenager. But Planet of the Apes is about an astronaut who basically goes through a wormhole in space and ends up a couple hundred years into the future, and finds out at the end the Earth is run by apes that walk upright, and they talk, and they're basically humans, but they look like apes. And all the humans that are left over are treated like apes and treated like animals. And it wasn't until the end of the movie that you find out that this new planet that he lived on was actually, he landed back on Earth like a couple hundred years later. And it's kind of a testimony to how we lost civilization and how the apes took over. And so that's kind of what this is portraying here. But the whole idea is that there's so much that we can learn from the past, but if we don't take the time to learn from it, we're doomed to repeat it, because it just keeps repeating over and over and over again. And history is subjective. What I mean by that, and this gets back to your example, Guitong, about when did you say that World War II started?
1939, September 1st.
Okay, was that the invasion of Poland?
Yes.
Okay, so the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany in 1939. If you ask most school kids in this country, they would say the World War, if they even know at all, they would say the World War II started in 1941.
Wow.
Why? because that's when the United
Pearl
States,
Harbor.
that's Pearl Harbor, and that's when the United States got into the war.
Hmm.
And so even though there is objective truth of what really happened, you don't necessarily have consensus of everybody agreeing that that is the truth. Does that make sense? Have I lost you on that one? Let me say it another way. I don't know if you've ever been a witness to an accident. You know, like at a street corner or something, and you're a pedestrian, and two cars hit each other. And there are a number of witnesses around, and you're one of them. And the police officer comes up to you and takes your, you know, your whatever you call it, you know, your testimony of being a witness. And you tell how you saw what happened, and you might even say, "Oh yeah, that man was at fault. He ran the red light, and the woman plowed into him." But there might be another person on an opposite corner that would say, "Oh yeah, the woman was at fault, and the man's innocent." So you have two different people at the same intersection seeing the same exact incident at the same exact time, and yet their perspective, their opinion of what truth is different. And the question is why?
So basically, you're saying history is humans' opinion on the truth.
That's
Right.
absolutely right. There's
There's only one truth.
there's only one truth, but it's how God sees it. You know, there is truth in history, but it's the history that God sees.
Hmm.
That every single person, every single human being is going to have a different skew on history. And each person is going to be, at least to a little bit, even just a tiny bit, they're going to be somewhat subjective with history.
If everyone has a consensus, all people have the consensus on what happened. For example, in a car accident, could everyone be wrong still? Like, I'm trying to understand that. So if there's no any disagreement on what happened, does that mean it's really what happened, or everybody could still be wrong?
Everybody could still be wrong because they may not
Okay.
know all the circumstances behind the scene, the circumstances that they aren't necessarily information that the group of people it isn't privy to yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? We tend to think, well,
Amazing.
history is facts and everybody agrees upon it. Even firsthand witnesses. There is true history, but God is the only one that sees it fully. For the rest of us, we are skewed by our worldviews, how we view the world, how we think the world is, and how we think the world should be. That is our worldview. And so how we witness things, how we observe things are going to be skewed by that worldview. It's skewed by what are called our presuppositions, things that we assume to be true, and we're usually not even aware of what those presuppositions are. They are values that we hold inside of us, things that we assume to be true, that are unquestioned, and that we base our, as we're experiencing reality day to day, moment to moment, we're interpreting what we're experiencing based on a foundation of presuppositions about life and truth that we're not even aware of. Values. We, as Christians, we share many values, but we live in a world that has a wide spectrum of values, and so our interpretation of history is skewed by those. And just our personal experiences. If we've been, let's say we've been in an accident, we were on a bicycle and we got hit by a car, hit by a person that was irresponsible. Well, let's say a few months later, we're a witness to somebody else getting hit by a bicycle or hit on their bicycle by a car. We are going to be more likely to consider the person in the car as being guilty rather than the person on the bicycle being irresponsible, because we personally experienced being hit on a bicycle, and we're going to naturally empathize with that person on the bicycle. So all of these things are inside of us. Most of the time, we're not even aware of them, but they skew our ability, like looking through binoculars. They skew or limit our ability to see history fully and to see it correctly. And so we really do, you know, it's helpful to see or to read what are called original sources. And well, I'll get to that later. I don't want to, you know, belabor that, and we're quickly running out of time here, so I'll move on. So whether you agree with it or not, you are part of God's meta narrative, his big story. And because he's placed you in Silicon Valley in 2023, at this time in your life, in this time of world history, you have a part to play in what he's doing here and what he's doing throughout our world. So what is your part in God's story? What is it that you've been given to be a part of his story? And what is it that you're responsible for within his story? Well, first of all, you've been given life. He's the author of life, and he chose to create you. You matter, and you make a difference. Your absence would be a great loss. His story just couldn't go on without you. And he wants us to protect the lives of all his image bearers. Individuality. There's only one God, and he's created you and me as unique individuals that are made in his image. Though God has specific plans for nations and for people groups, his primary emphasis is on the individual, on you. He wants us to protect the individuality of not only ourselves, but also of others, and to resist the efforts of others, and also even efforts inside of ourselves, because we have a fleshly nature and we tend to fall into patterns when we're interacting with other people. We need to resist the efforts and temptations toward what's called collectivism and groupthink. Everybody's doing it. Why aren't you? Everybody thinks this way. Why don't you? You understand what I mean? God wants us not to think according to the group. He doesn't want us to act according to what the group, you know, to go along with the crowd. I mean, if the crowd is going the right way and they're thinking the right way, well, that's great. But if they aren't, he wants us to stand as individuals.
Amen.
He wants us to stand as individuals, to stand apart and to be courageous and to go against the grain. Because you've all heard of the lemmings, I think they're called, those animals that come to a cliff and they all jump off. And the reason that they all jump off is because the ones before them were jumping off, and they're all following the one in front of them, you know, and they're perishing. And God doesn't want that for us. He's also given us liberty. You've been given the privilege of liberty, and the definition, my best definition of liberty is not freedom, it's free will choice. Having the ability to choose freely without the manipulation of others, without the constraint of others, having free will choice. Even within God's very detailed plans, you still have free will choice to obey him or to disobey him, disobey his will. God does know ahead of time what choices you're going to make. And he's made provisions for your disobedience. So ultimately, his plans will still be accomplished, even if you screw up. We just may kind of get beat up in the process. We are to preserve and fight to retain our own liberty, our own free will choice, and also the free will choice of every person. And we're called to resist manipulation, to resist tyranny, to resist every form of tyranny that tries to bring people under bondage and compulsion. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have responsibilities towards society, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't obey laws. We have laws that we should obey. We have responsibilities within our society, all those types of things. But ultimately, we should be able to choose to follow those things rather than being compelled to by force. I don't know if that made sense or not, but you can chew on that a little bit. He's also given us what's called self-government. And you may have heard this term self-government before, but it's usually used in talking about our nation and our independence from the British, from the British government, from our mother country. And so now we're no longer a colony of Britain. We are a self-governed country. But the self-government I'm talking about is not talking about nations or countries. It's talking about the individual, you and me, being self-governed. To fully obey his will, you must be self-governed. So what does this mean? This means to do what is right without the need for external constraints by laws and authorities. Means you do what's right because it's right, not because somebody forces you to do it, or even because laws force you to do it. You do it what's right because it's right. And this happens most successfully when you're a born-again believer and you're allowing the Holy Spirit to live through you. The Bible calls this walking in the Spirit. So we're supposed to walk in the Spirit, allow the Holy Spirit to have control of our lives, so we naturally do those things that are pleasing to God and are obeying God without having to have, people telling us, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. We needed some of that in our lives, but ultimately God's desire for us is to be self-governed. And that's the way we were in the Garden of Eden. That's the way Adam and Eve were created. But they also were created with liberty, free will choice. And they made the wrong choices. So we're supposed to set an example for others of the Spirit-led, self-governed life. And we're also, if we have children or grandchildren, we're supposed to train our children to also obey the Spirit's guidance. Another thing that God has given us is called stewardship or ownership. Some people call it ownership, but it's really stewardship because the scriptures clearly say that all things belong to God. Everything belongs to him, especially if we're believers. We're most happy when in our mind and heart we say we don't own anything. Everything belongs to him, and I'm only a steward of what belongs to him. Yes, he's given it to me to take care of. I need to take care of it well as his representative, whether it's money or houses or a job or a family or a community of friends or believers, or my mind, my health. All of these things involve stewardship and taking care of them, but ultimately it belongs to God. But nations, people groups, and individuals have all been made steward owners of all of God's creation. It's his property. We're supposed to care and rule over it according to his principles. This is part of what's called God's creation mandate and dominion mandate, which we read in the Genesis chapter 1, where God said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over his creation. And as an individual, you possess and you're stewards over tangible property, things that you own, you touch, but you're also a steward of what's called internal property. And those are your beliefs, your emotions, your will, your thoughts. Those are internal, those are your property as well. And you're supposed to be a good steward of that as well. And God has called us to respect both the tangible and internal property of others, and also work to preserve personal ownership of property. God's also called us to have personal responsibility and accountability. You're personally responsible and accountable before God for the choices that you make, whether in obedience or disobedience, and will reap what you sow, either blessing or cursing. But you still need to be responsible for whatever you do. Whether you make right choices or wrong choices, whether you screw up or you're a shining light, you need to be responsible and accountable for those things in your life. Yeah, but because we belong to nations and people groups, we will also experience the consequences of our national disobedience or obedience. Even if we personally aren't responsible, we will feel the effects of that. And we're feeling the effects, every day under the current administration and under the current state leadership. The sins are many, and we, even though we're not the culprits, we didn't make the decisions. Because we're a part of this nation or a part of this state, we do experience the consequences of others' bad choices. And part of this area of being personally responsible and accountable, we're accountable before God for voting. That's a gift that God's given us. It's a stewardship. And we're accountable for those that we choose to lead us, assuming there are fair elections, of course. And we're supposed to keep them, or those leaders, accountable for their actions and decisions. And the last thing that God's given us is the opportunity for freedom. The freedom isn't an automatic, it's a consequence. So freedom and liberty aren't the same thing. Liberty is free will choice. But if we express our liberty, our free will choice, in a self-governed way, as a good steward of God's property, and we take personal responsibility for our actions, as a result of that, we will experience freedom in our lives, a sense of freedom. But if we don't express our liberty in a self-governed way, if we're poor stewards of God's property, if we don't take personal responsibility, we'll experience bondage in our lives. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yep.
So these things that I've shared with you, your part in God's, in providential history, your part in the plan, in the big story. I don't know if you've noticed, but these things, life, liberty, property, individuality, freedom, stewardship, do those things, do they remind you of anything that you've heard before? Maybe in a famous document?
Declaration of
Bill-
Independence.
Yes, Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Inalienable rights are rights which cannot be taken away by a government. They're given by God and they can only be taken away by God. Certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So our founding fathers got it right. They got it right. They wrote a document that expressed this idea of a providential worldview, and that we have been given gifts within that and responsibilities within that. Let's see what time it is here, 8:41. I promised I would end by 9. So we'll end one section by 9, but that's probably all that we're going to get to tonight. And maybe I can share some of it when we're on the trip. Any questions at the moment or comments? Nothing?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is great. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So, as we approach this new idea of having a providential view of history, it's something that we need to learn, and it's also something that we need to communicate to others. What is God's desire for the communication of his history, of this providential history? Well, the first thing is he wants us to remember. When I go on these tour groups with these, 8th graders, well, I go with 8th graders through 12th graders, but a lot of them are 8th graders. And the first day on the bus, I pick them up at the airport, meet them at the baggage claim, get them on the bus. And we're driving away from the airport, and I give them a little speech, to kind of get their mindset right. And what I tell them is that if they don't remember anything else from this trip that they're on, I want them to remember one thing. I want them to remember it and not forget it, but always to remember it. Do you know what that, it's just one word. Do you know what that word is? And most of the time they don't get it. And it's the word remember. I want them to remember to remember. We must remember the works that God has done in the past and how God has worked through humankind and how men have been blessed or cursed depending on whether or not they obeyed God, whether they were self-governed, whether they used their liberty in a way as good stewards. All these things that I've already mentioned. We can learn from the past. We must remember. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 18 through 19, God said, "And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. Then it shall be, if you by any means forget the Lord your God, and you follow other gods," which of course that's what we do in our society today, even as Christians. This blasted cell phone, it's become a god. I worship this thing. I spend way too much time on it. We, as Christians, we have gods, other gods. It says, and if by any means you forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and you serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day that you shall surely perish. And that's not a condemnation as much as it is a reality. That if we forget the Lord, we are going to make we're going to follow our sinful nature, and we're going to make all these mistakes again and again and again. And it leads to being perished. He also wants us to pass on these truths and principles to each other, people we know, and to future generations, to our kids, our grandkids, great-grandkids. And that's what drives me to do what I do. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 18 through 21. God says, "Therefore, you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, like the days of the heavens above the earth." We're supposed to live every day in this providential view of history, live every day, seeing ourselves not as placeholders and, just kind of, taking up space on the earth until we die someday, and then we get to spend eternity with heaven. No, God's called us to rock this world. He's called us to have tremendous influence in this world. He's called us to spend every day meditating on his word, applying his word. When when you lay down and when you rise up and you go in and out, and when you're walking by the way, our entire lives, 24/7, we are part of this meta narrative, this providential plan. And he wants us to not only live it, but he wants us to share it, pass it down to future generations, to our children. And the consequences of forgetting God. What if we forget what God has done? What are the consequences of forgetting? Well, there's a phrase that when we go on our trip, I'm going to be sharing certain phrases with you that I hope you will remember. One of them I've taught you already tonight, and that's those who will not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Another one is a phrase, ideas have consequences. How we think, how we see the world will drive what we do. And what we do will impact others, impact the world in a way that there will very definitely be consequences. So it's important that we have the right worldview and that we live out that worldview. Because if we don't, there are consequences. And here's an example. You have a guy named Hegel who lived in the 1830s that taught a philosophy of life called the dialectic. And the dialectic basically said that in life is the meaning of life is struggle. And that in life, you're going to have people that disagree, philosophies or worldviews or whatever that disagree, and they're going to come into clash with each other. And you're going to have a prevailing way of thinking, a prevailing philosophy or worldview, and it's called the synthesis. No, the thesis, I'm sorry, the thesis. But along will come another worldview that comes on, into the political scene or the social scene or whatever, and it will conflict with that prevailing view. And that's called the antithesis. And those two will conflict. And at some point, one of those worldviews will prevail, or the two of them will mesh together and a new one will be formed. And that's called the synthesis. And what he proposed is that all of life has this conflict at its root. The thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. Conflict. The conflict is the way of life. Well, Darwin then came along and in 1859 wrote his book on the origin of species, and that was the beginning of evolution, Darwinian evolution. And he took Hegel's ideas and he applied them to biology and basically came up with the theories of the survival of the fittest. And I won't get into all the details of it, but the idea of evolution, that the strongest species survive, the weakest species fall away and die and don't exist anymore. And eventually, over time, not only species but mankind will evolve and become better and better and more evolved until they reach some level of perfection or whatever. Well, those ideas were picked up by Karl Marx. He used the Hegelian dialectic and Darwin's theory of evolution to support his views of how social classes struggle. And that led to the Russian Revolution, the conflict between the bourgeois, which were supposedly the rich and powerful people, and the proletariat, which was all the masses who were poor. and the masses rose up and overcame, killed the Tsar and his family, and basically took over. And that's where communism came into Russia in the Russian Revolution in 1917, I think it was. But it was all based on the Hegelian dialectic and Darwin's theory of evolution. Well, then along came Joseph Stalin. He also read Darwin's book and the Hegelian dialectic, and he became an atheist, and he was responsible for killing millions and millions of Russians. Then there was another guy named Friedrich Nietzsche, who also read some of these ideas that had consequences. And he said the best way to evolve as a human race was to have wars, have continuous war, and to kill the weaker races. And then came along Adolf Hitler, and he said, well, the Aryan race is obviously the strongest race, and we need to get rid of all the other weaker races. And so he used that Darwinism and the Hegelian dialectic to justify killing 6 million Jews and 5 million other people, gypsies and homosexuals and various ones that he considered to be inferior races after reading Darwin and Nietzsche. So can you see how it's so important? Ideas have consequences, and we need to have the right ideas, the right view of history, and to be able to not only have that for ourselves, but to be communicating it to others and to be spreading this to others. Regarding history, George Orwell, who was the author of the book 1984, he said, "He who controls the past controls the future." And if you've read 1984, you would know that it's about an oppressive government that basically watches everybody in their private lives through TV screens. Gee, sounds kind of familiar to today. And they're constantly watching. And so you have to totally obey this government, and this government watching you on the screens is called Big Brother. Big Brother is watching you. And so you have to do everything right. And they have like social credit scores, and just like the Chinese do today. And within this book, or within this culture, this oppressive, tyrannical culture, they have the Ministry of Truth. And the role of the Ministry of Truth was to continually change, it was to continually put out propaganda as news, and to continually change history and history books in order to support the current narrative, and to destroy those history books that didn't feed into the proper narrative of the government. And so George Orwell was giving a prediction for the future, and basically saying whoever controls the past, whoever controls the telling of history, whether it's our college professors, or whether it's our curriculum companies that are writing the curriculum books, or whether it's our newscasters on TV, or whether it's our alternative news that many of us listen to now, whoever controls the telling of the past will put out ideas that will have consequences into the future. Karl Marx, in his Communist Manifesto, said, "A people without a heritage are easily persuaded." We have to know what our roots are. We have to know what our founding fathers believed. We have to know what the Puritans believed. We have to know what the Pilgrims believed. We have to know what our brothers and sisters in the Protestant Reformation believed. We have to know what the early church believed. We have to have this heritage in our lives as a foundation stone that we can then build our lives upon. And if you rip that heritage out, if you rip that history away and take that away, as our government and our media and the powers that be, I'm getting political here, I know, but I know that many of you believe the same way I do. The deep state and those in the international scene, they are trying to rewrite our history and remove our history and remove the importance of history in our lives, because if they can remove history from us, then the entire world will be easily persuaded to follow their ways. Adolf Hitler, and I'm going to finish with this. One of the famous things that he said was, make the lie big. He didn't mind telling lies. He didn't mind telling lies that people knew were lies. But he said, if you're going to lie, make the lie big, make it simple, and keep saying it. Keep saying it over and over and over. And eventually, they will believe it. So it's so important to see history from God's perspective, not from a humanistic perspective. It's so important for us to live as members of this meta-narrative, living out God's wills and purposes, and doing it in such a way that we're responsible to the gifts that He's given us and the responsibilities He's given us and these inalienable rights, and to communicate those things to others. Not only live them out for ourselves, but to communicate them to others and bring others into this providential worldview, and to hold on to our history with everything that we have, because if we lose our history, we've lost it all. That's how important history is. You can take your science and technology and engineering and math, and you can throw it out the window, because it will be worthless if we lose our history. And that's why this trip is so important. And I hope you're looking forward to it. I'm done.
Thank you, George. It's great.
That was awesome. Thank you.
I hope that was helpful and not too boring. So
It's very helpful.
Yeah. I'll probably have some more questions on the trip.
yeah.
For you.
So the other sections that I was going to share tonight, if I had time, and honestly, I didn't really anticipate that I would have time, is another short section on historical revisionism, how the methods in which we are being programmed and being fed propaganda, how they are revising history, and how we can detect it. And so that's probably only a half hour sharing at the most, maybe. And then the third thing I was going to share with you, if we had time, was a section on what's called government and jurisdiction, and talking about what government really is. I heard a message recently from a guy named Frank Viola. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. He's seems to be pretty popular right now. I know, Greg Fife, my brother-in-law, he absolutely loves Greg Viola. Is that his name? Is it Greg Viola? Well, let's pretend it is, even if it isn't. Anyway, Frank Viola. And there's some good things that Frank has to say, but this particular message that I listened to, he was basically saying that the Garden of Eden was, and with God being, in charge, was the only true. I mean, if I understood him right, I'm going to have to go back and listen to it. But if I understood right, he was saying that what took place in the Garden of Eden was God's intent for the world. And once the fall happened and Adam and Eve's descendants left the Garden of Eden, one of the first things they did was to start a city, and in order to protect themselves, basically starting civil government. And he was basically saying that was the beginning of the world system, and we're told not to be part of the world. And so the implication was kind of like, well, we should ignore politics. We should ignore things going on in our world. We shouldn't be a part of that. We should focus all our energies on our intimacy with God. And while I understand the value of that, I also see the danger of that, because God was the one, and so this section that I had hoped to go over, and maybe I will at some point, but really points out how God created family government in the Adam and Eve in the garden. That's family government. He created church government, when he called Aaron and his sons, to be priests before him. And he also called civil government. And we see a testimony to that when Noah got off the ark and he built an altar to the Lord. and God basically gave Noah the responsibility for capital punishment. If you have a person in your midst who sheds innocent blood, that person's blood shall be shed. That's the death penalty. That's the role of civil government. And so, and of course, throughout scriptures, we're given exhortations on how we're supposed to interact with civil government. I don't see any place where Jesus, condemns civil government as being something we shouldn't be involved with or interact with. We're supposed to be good stewards, and he's called the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. So he's a governor also. He's in government. So all of life has its basis in this idea of government, whether it's the government of God over mankind, or the government of Satan over mankind, or the government of men over mankind, or even the government of man over himself, as we've already said tonight, the self-government. Our whole world is based on governing. And it's important to understand that when we're going to a place like Washington, D.C., that has so much corruption in it, it's only corrupted by the sinful nature of man that has corrupted it. But government itself, civil government itself, is not evil. It's actually a godly institution that God created for the preservation of man, to protect rights, to punish evildoers, and to reward the righteous. So I've given you a little bit of a hint. Anyway, that's for another time, maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you all for hanging in there with me.
Yep.
And do you have any questions, comments, anything about the trip coming up? Anything?
I thought I have a question. Did we figure out about Tuesday night, the restaurant? Because we're gonna change it, or I just thought of that when I was looking back through it.
Yeah, I think the consent in that, I think that was in the email also. So you need to go back through your emails and look at it. Unless you guys didn't get it. Maybe.
Oh, did we figure out what we're gonna do?
Well, we
Okay.
haven't figured out what we're going to do, but we have figured out what we're not going to do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're not going to go to that, that expensive restaurant. I just think it would be probably for our group a waste of money. We wouldn't get the bang, from our buck, I think. So
Okay.
we'll pick an alternative, whether it's Golden Corral, all you can eat, or we'll go someplace. But there are tons of restaurants around there.
Sounds good.
All right. Anything else?
Just quick question, George. I haven't looked at the schedule in detail, but looks like we're gonna have a tight schedule on the trip. So are we gonna have some free time, like on some days, like just looking around in the city, or just it's pretty much I mean every hour is pretty much scheduled.
The only unscheduled time, even though it looks like it's scheduled, is there's Smithsonian time, Smithsonian Museum. And of course, there's like 19 Smithsonian museums in the city, and you've only got like 3 hours to visit. And so, if you've been with the Smithsonian's before, if you've been to DC, you might choose to use that just to walk around or do whatever. But you're right. Right now, there's not a lot of wiggle room. But here's the good news. It's our trip.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
We're not going through a tour company. And so if you guys said, hey, George, I don't. I'm thinking I don't want to go to this next thing. Can I meet back up with you at the next thing after? I want to spend some. We can do that. Or if as a group we, there's a consensus, that we want to change things up, we can do that.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I just laid the schedule out so that we would see the maximum amount of stuff within the time that we have. But we can always cut stuff out or even rearrange things. Although there is some impact because there, especially in Washington, well, actually everywhere, there are appointments that we have. We have appointments for the Capitol, for the Library of Congress, it just goes on and on. And so one alteration in the schedule may eliminate being able to see something.
Thanks.
What else?
I just need to pack.
Yeah. Hey, Kurt.
I think you did real good on the weather report.
Oh.
That's good.
Thank you.
Can you keep it up? No, that's a real blessing.
What do you
I've
mean?
been-
Are you talking about
I've
the
been-
teaching? Or
No, the weather that you talked
the weather.
about. And I'm just joking on that, but it is nice. I've been in DC at 104 degrees, and yeah, it's a bit tough, but that's good.
Yeah.
No,
We shouldn't
and
have
in the teaching, it really does, whether we look at it, dog and cat theology, self-focused, etc. Yeah, I was at a group meeting yesterday or whatever, and these are different people working, and boy, talking about the self-centeredness of the valley, and they were younger people, and it really is. It is so much, what's in it for me, and if it doesn't affect me, and I just really pine and pray, because if somebody doesn't understand exactly the stuff that you're talking about, how are things going to change when they won't be able to get out and vote, or vote intelligently, or just do anything for their neighbors? So, and I just happen to work up in Palo Alto, and if we think it's bad down here, up in Palo Alto, it is night and day, even more self-centered, where right downtown, and it's very, very apparent, and it's sad, really, really sad. So I hope this will be inspiring and give me some words to bring back to some people and share. So I'm looking forward to that part, and to be with some guys. Hopefully we have some time that we'll be able to spend together on our knees or wherever.
Yeah.
Would be good.
And we built some time in for that, like at the White House and Capitol building and Supreme Court. We built in some prayer and warfare time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, George, I wish I could stay longer, but I have to run and drive my friend to the airport. But see you Sunday.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's just do a quick prayer and then we'll sign off. Okay. Father, I thank you for these men and also the men that couldn't be with us tonight. And Lord, I pray your protection and covering over them, that the enemy would be bound in their lives in the name of Jesus Christ, that they would be held up and protected, that there would be no sicknesses or accidents or injuries or personal problems that would come up that would distract them or hinder them from being able to go. Lord, we commit our lives, we commit this trip into your hands, and believe that you have called us to go there, and we believe that we are a part of your plan, your providential meta-narrative. And so, Lord, while we're there, would you please accomplish your will in our lives and help us to be sensitive to your spirit and to hear what you're saying and to respond, and to listen and to respond, and to be obedient as you're leading us and guiding us on this trek. You truly are the tour leader, not me. You are the one, and so we submit to you and your plan, your will, whatever that is. Lord, help us all to get prepared to accomplish all the details, and also in our absence, would you please watch over our family members that we're leaving behind, preserve and protect and cover them. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
And
Thank you very
guys.
much.
Thanks for hanging in there with me. And we will see you probably on Sunday.
Yes. See you Sunday.
Okay,
Amen.
Good night.
good night.
God bless, guys.